Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, April 13th, 2022. And on this episode, I've got the latest unconstitutional federal gun control regulations, this time on so-called ghost guns, attacking 80% lowers and kits and things like that. Basically, the government wants to make sure that they can not only track and trace all firearms, but all of them in existence. That's what they really want. But they also want to register, track, and trace kits, parts, ammo, accessories, anything and everything. But if we adopted the attitude of the founders, especially as we're close to the anniversary just next week of Lexington and Concord and the shot heard round the world, all guns, all parts, all accessories, all ammunition would be undetectable to the government, untraceable. I'm going to cover all that, plus I've got some quotes from Abigail Adams on power, John Dickinson on precedent and compliance, and for his birthday, just a brief closing from Thomas Jefferson about the limits of the Constitution. First of all, before we get to all that, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you for being here. I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. And while we allow people another moment or so to get notifications to join us on the mainstream platforms for the live stream, hello to everyone out in the live chat. There's Liberty Revolutionary, my good buddy in Missouri. I appreciate your tweets last night. I will get back to you with questions as I have them. Thank you so much. Cheriton Farmer, also in Missouri. Hope you got a little bit of sleep last night, too. Dixie Strong in Alabama. Sharon Patriot. Cowboy Roy Rogers. Tyler B. Erwin Havernick. Murray Ray in Michigan. Clay Kent. Cowboy Roy Rogers. Tyler Smith. Zyphos. Taco Time. Awesome. Dave Smith and everyone else. I really appreciate you guys being here, but let's get right to this. And I want to start with one of these agencies, one of the many that shouldn't exist, never should have existed in the first place, should just be a store, the ATF. ATFW, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and weed would make a nice corner store here in Southern California. But anyways, here from Monday. Today, they say the Department of Justice announced, well, this is actually from the DOJ. The Department of Justice announced that it has submitted to the Federal Register the frame or receiver final rule, which modernizes the definition of a firearm. Once implemented, this rule will clarify that parts, kits that are readily convertible to firearms are subject to the same regulations as traditional firearms. These regulatory updates will help curb the proliferation of ghost guns. They like calling it ghosts because ghosts are scary. I don't think we should use that term, but I ain't afraid of no ghosts, right? They want to help curb the proliferation of ghost guns. They call them that because they are assembled from kits, they do not contain serial numbers, and are sold without background checks. All unconstitutional stuff, but all stuff that they want to have on anything and everything. Then the DOJ says that makes them difficult to trace and easy to acquire by criminals. Well, anybody who wants to defend themselves to the government, anybody who wants to exercise their rights without permission from the government is a criminal to the government. So, of course, all this stuff is pretty bad. And of course, our great friends over at CNN put it this way. It requires those selling these kits to mark. Now, they're not always kits. They just want to any parts and accessories. They want to go after all of it, really. And each step towards that is another step towards total control and total regulation. I mean, it's pretty close to that already. It requires those selling these kits to mark components with a serial number so the eventual weapon produced can be traced. I mean, that's exactly what's going on here. And it mandates that firearm dealers add a serial number to already built ghost guns they come across in their businesses. I covered this. I've been talking about this quite a bit lately in some articles and podcasts and things like this. Here's an episode last month, Joe's new federal gun control. I was talking about pistol braces and this regulation from this week, the 80% lowers, the ghost gun ones, but how to stop it. I'm not going to cover that today, but the short version is we can't comply with it. As long as you comply with it, there's no reason for them to ever get rid of it. They're not going to. So that's the short version. Now, here from Gun Owners of America, who does, of course, a lot of great work on the right to keep and bear arms. And they put it this way, ATF is at it again, rewriting federal law to create new gun control laws. But this quote that they have in here from Aiden Johnston, who's the director of federal affairs, is just a little bit off to me. They say Biden's proposal to create a comprehensive national gun registry and end the online sale of gun parts without the passage of a new law exemplifies his disregard for the Second Amendment. Now, I don't know where to go with this, but I mean, I do. I think what I'm seeing on this from most gun rights activists and most gun organizations, they're taking this kind of a position. Either they bypass Congress, or the rules are as clear as mud, so they're very confusing, lots of pages and stuff like that, and that's problematic, and it's hard for people to follow. And they're both true. It's going to be costly, that's also true, and that'll affect millions of people, that's also true. But if that's your lead issue, I think you're really missing the point. And I've often talked about the same kind of thing in regards to organizations more on the left, like ACLU and others, that oppose facial recognition surveillance because it disproportionately impacts people of color. And it's actually very true. It has a far worse impact using this mass warrantless surveillance technology, at least today, against people of color. But we don't oppose these things because they just have this other piece to it. We oppose warrantless mass surveillance because it's bad. We oppose federal gun control because it's bad. I think all of these arguments from the gun rights organizations, they miss the point entirely. I don't really care, to be honest with you, if the ATF makes really clear and easy to follow rules. I don't care. Or if they make implementation cheap, or they go through Congress and pass a law through Congress, or they affect just one person rather than millions. There is no federal gun control measure, none, past, present, or future, ever, that could ever exist, at least as the Constitution is written today, including its amendments, that are authorized by the Constitution. And on top of it, if we adopted the attitude of the founders and the old revolutionaries, if we adopted their approach, all guns would be undetectable to the government. And interestingly enough, I think that's a very important message that we should make all the time. Now, we can say, I understand why some of these groups are saying, well, they bypass Congress, because really what they're trying to do is they're trying to get more people that are kind of on the margins who may, they may not be with us. And there aren't many with us that actually take the view that there should be no gun control, especially, and we're talking about federal gun control today, there should be no federal gun control. So they're trying to get more grassroots support. But if you take the approach that it's okay to do it, as long as they get it through Congress, in the long run, you're actually harming the effort, in my view. And in just a few days, we've got the anniversary on April 19th of the battles of Lexington and Concord, and the shot heard round the world. But first, before getting into that, I should actually mention, let me pull it up on the screen here. If you want to actually keep track of the stuff that I'm mentioning in this episode, like the previous episode on how to stop Joe's new gun control, or these articles, and I've got some history lessons coming up here on Lexington and Concord. If you want to follow us in some interesting stuff from the NRA as well, make sure you're over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out. And on each episode, I have a blog post that I publish about 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done. You're going to find all the different platforms we're on. You scroll down a little bit, you'll find the show links section, and you'll be able to see all the stuff that I'm referencing for that particular episode. You can find all the different platforms we're on, both video and audio, live streaming, archive, all kinds of information that you can use to share and learn more and read on your own time. And you can even find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. Anyways, let's look at Lexington and Concord. And up on the screen here, I've got an article. I'm not going to really highlight too many pieces of it, from TJ Martinell that was published back in 2015. He was covering some research by Dave Kopel. I apologize if I get your name wrong on that, Dave, at Independence Institute in Colorado. Dave does great work on the right to keep and bear arms, but it's called How the British Gun Control Program Precipitated the American Revolution. So here's how TJ starts it. He says, when people think of the causes of the American War for Independence, they think of slogans like no taxation without representation, or a cause célèbre like the Boston Tea Party. But in reality, he writes, what finally brought things to a shooting war at the time was a British gun control program. And some highlights. Basically, back in September 1774, this is actually in response to, of course, we had the Tea Party, we had the Intolerable or the Coercive Acts, the Boston Port Act, the shutting down the legislature, things like that. But in 1774, they really started ramping up their gun control measures, the British. So General Gage, in that September, he seized gunpowder from a stockpile north of Boston. You couldn't really really keep it at home. It wasn't as stable at the time. So then people at that time, they started resigning from the official militias, which were actually under the control of the crown, and started forming their own independent militias and stockpiling their own firearms. And gunpowder. And so Governor Gage then ramped it up. TJ writes, Gage then tried another approach. Warrantless searches. Warrantless surveillance and gun control has always gone together. All through history, here it is in a lead up to the revolution as well. He then tried another approach. Warrantless searches of people for arms and ammunition without any provocation. This is part of the general warrant program that really led to the revolution. The policy drew fierce criticism from the colonists. In fact, the Boston Gazette, this was the mouthpiece of the Sons of Liberty, the Boston Gazette wrote that of all of Gage's offenses, it was this one that outraged people the most. Do you have authorization to have this firearm or ammunition or gunpowder? You don't have permission, so you can't have it. We're just going to search you and take it or arrest you. In October of 1774, the Provincial Congress convened with John Hancock acting as its president. The Congress adopted a resolution that condemned the military occupation of Boston and called on private citizens to arm themselves and engage in military drills. So they're officially saying, okay, we got to arm up for this. And we also heard Patrick Henry talk about this in a few months later. The Provincial Congress also appointed a committee of safety, giving it the power to call up a militia. This meant that the militia of Massachusetts no longer answered to the British government. That's how Dave Coble put it. It was now the instrument of what was becoming an independent government of Massachusetts. So if the people could defend themselves, could arm themselves, this was certainly an indication that they were no longer under the rule of the centralized power. So what did the king do? The king responded, and Parliament pushed it, and Gage was all on board. Well, a little cautious, but it only took a little while to really push it to happen. But the king then banned importation of all arms and ammunition. So any arms and ammunition were blocked from importation. Now, of course, they said, well, if you just get a permit and approval to do this, you can absolutely do it. So gun control like we have it today. But of course, no one ever got a permit. So the gun control ban was total. Anyways, after the British learned that they were stockpiling gunpowder and probably a weapons cache in Concord, they marched on Concord then to destroy it. The short version, keeping track of firearms, ammunition, accessories, that's what tyrants, that's what kings and monarchs and despots have always done. That's what they did in the lead up to the Revolutionary War. That's what they're doing today. But if we adopted the attitude of the founders, all guns, all accessories, all ammunition would be undetectable to the government. And we shouldn't be surprised about what we're facing today. We absolutely shouldn't. This is the kind of thing that should be expected, especially because, and let me pull up Abigail Adams here. This is a quote that I've used many times here. She said, power, whether vested in many or a few, is ever grasping. The founding generation, the old revolutionaries, they certainly recognized that when government had power, if you didn't keep them in check, that power, people would always try to expand that power over time. And once you establish something, you create what John Dickinson called in response to the Stamp Act, the detestable precedent. The detestable precedent. He said, if you comply with the act, you rivet perpetual chains upon your unhappy country. Because as soon as you comply with something that they're not authorized to do, that's the precedent that they want. And he was specifically responding in his argument to tell people to resist and oppose and not comply with the Stamp Act, that even if you thought it wasn't too cumbersome, you could deal with it. It was logistically difficult. Maybe you didn't want to pay a couple of pennies, whatever it may be. Maybe you didn't think it was that expensive. Now, of course, whatever you think is not expensive, to someone it always is. But he's saying it doesn't matter how small it is. As soon as you establish that precedent, and I'm going to talk about Jefferson's quote on this as well at the end, but as soon as you establish that precedent, that's exactly what they've been wishing for. They want to do that so they can build upon it and expand that over time. So with this in mind, this idea that power always expands, compliance really is violence against the liberty of the people, and it establishes a precedent to expand more, let's look what the NRA did to all of us some years ago. Here's a statement from them on July 31st, 2018. Regardless of what, and who was this? I'm not sure who wrote that. Chris Cox. Regardless of what a person may be able to punish on the internet, and here they are making a statement about 3D printed firearms, which I guess if you think about it in principle, the idea is still the same. They don't like 3D printed firearms, the government, the supporters of the monster state, because they can't track or trace them. They can't do background checks. They can't control who can make and who can't. And that's really problematic to tyrants. And the same goes for these so-called ghost guns. The problem that they have is not that people have access to them. I mean, certainly that is the long-run goal here for some people. But for today, the way that they establish the detestable precedent to go further is to make sure they know everyone who has them. And that's the same issue. So here's how the NRA put it in regards to 3D guns. Regardless of what a person may be able to punish on the internet, undetectable plastic guns have been illegal for 30 years. Federal law passed in 1988, crafted with NRA support, makes it unlawful to manufacture, import, sell, ship, deliver, possess, transfer, or receive an undetectable firearm. Man, this is just easy peasy stuff, straightforward. Since government power always expands, and since once you establish a precedent, the detestable precedent, they're going to expand on that. If you support banning some firearms because they're undetectable, sooner or later, they're going to expand that to all firearms that are undetectable. Then they're going to expand it to kits that are undetectable, and then parts, and then ammo. And they're going to just keep doing this over and over and over until they've got everything. And that's what the precedent that the NRA and their support of unconstitutional federal gun control in the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988 set the stage for today. It didn't just come out of the blue. It didn't come out of nowhere. We could even go back to 1934, the National Firearms Act, the Gun Control Act of 68, and the rest. Here's how Thomas Jefferson put it, celebrating his birthday, April 13th. I think it was 1743, somewhere around there. Here's his argument against the constitutionality of a national bank. And his big problem was it wasn't authorized by the Constitution. And the big problem of doing stuff that's not authorized by the Constitution is that it establishes a precedent to do more. And here's how Jefferson put that, much more eloquently than I could: to take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specially drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition. That doesn't mean it's going to have a boundless field of power and use it all today, but you establish the precedent that as long as they can go beyond, give them a limit. Give a kid, those of you with young children, you know, if you tell your kids you got to eat your vegetables first before you have dessert, and then maybe every 3 days you start to say, well, I'm not going to enforce that. Sooner or later, if those boundaries are so soft that they have no meaning, eventually they think they have no boundaries at all. And that's how the people have treated government since at least 1791, and probably all through history. But Thomas Jefferson certainly warned us. And I think it's so important to get this kind of message about rigid constitutional adherence out to more people every single day. It's why I do this show. It's why I do all the work that I do at the 10th Amendment Center, and there's absolutely nothing out there that helps us roll up our sleeves every single day and get this kind of message out to more people than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I really appreciate you guys spending some time with me today. Let me see if I've got some questions or comments that I can get back to over in the chat. Sharon Patriot, we have protection against unjust or unwarranted search or seizure. Yes, well, I mean, we can't rely on government to limit its own power. NRA sheesh, as usual, says Haji, 1954, without a doubt. Someone mentioned the Mecklenburg Declaration. That's one that I actually really need to do an episode on, and I appreciate Dixie Strong mentioning that. I was thinking of actually doing an episode. Someone mentioned it last year. Maybe, Dixie, it was you as well. Aviate Rabbit says, and I know I'm not getting that screen name wrong, NRA, not real advocates. Yeah, if you're supporting federal gun control, they support the background check system. They supported this Undetectable Firearms Act. I think they were on board with the NFA in 1934. This is really, really bad. Larry Laird says over on Facebook, all this government overreach is fully unconstitutional and needs to be stopped. The ATF should not even exist. Period. Shouldn't even exist. And in fact, in response on our Twitter account, if you're not following us over at 10th Amendment, all spelled out over on Twitter, sometimes we have some fun stuff over there, but we responded to a tweet from the president talking about federal gun control, the new implementation of this new regulation. And we just responded with a meme that said disband, the only thing the ATF is authorized to do under a constitution. Sharon asks, how can plastics from a 3D printer withstand a metal projectile? I don't know about this. I'm not an expert on this. There's another person, Sal Mayweather, Sal the Agorist over on Twitter, that has a lot of great information on that as well. I've seen some videos talking about, the frame is not plastic. See, I don't know anything about this. So maybe the frame is metal and part of it is plastic. I'm not really sure. Polymers. But I've seen over the years how some demonstration videos, they're much different and much more advanced than they were just some years ago. So it's pretty fascinating. Bonehead says anti-gunners are the ones most likely to use guns against you. They certainly want to use the power of government and use government guns. And everybody wants to actually push it off on somebody else to do the violence a lot of times. And that's really what it gets down to. Gun control regulations are an act of violence. They're violence against the sovereignty of the people, the final authority of the people. They're violence against your liberty. They're violence against people who actually want to exercise their rights. And when they come to enforce it, that certainly requires violence. This is really bad stuff. We want to be a peaceful society, not a violent one. Abolish the ATF, said Haji, 1954. Clay Kent, awesome as usual. I really appreciate all that. I will read through more of the comments a little bit later today or maybe tomorrow. You can also email me, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. I read through all of that. But I don't get to reply to too many of them. Jay Armstrong said, I built an 80% pistol. That's pretty cool. I am just awful. My grouping when I go to the range, which isn't very often, is terrible. But these are things that I really want to learn how to do over time because I want to be able to, I'm slowly learning. I came from a family that long time ago did lots of hunting and lots of firearm stuff, and I really wanted to be a part of that as a kid. But for whatever reason, we grew up in a very socialist area, and it just wasn't part of my culture. So I grew up being kind of afraid of firearms and guns and basically everything. We were just kind of isolated. And sometimes being isolated from the bad guys is a good thing. But these are things that I want to learn over time because I want to practice what I preach. So I want to get a little bit better with my shooting. I also want to learn how to build stuff. So it's cool to see people with feedback and to learn from them as well and watch their experience. So Jay, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Anyways, I appreciate you spending some time with me today. If you want to help us out, don't forget the membership program, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. There's also leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, smashing the like button, subscribing, getting notification, leaving comments. All those things will help trigger the algorithm of those mainstream platforms and tell them to show the program to more people. Anyways, I appreciate you being here today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you learned something. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.